Hello, and welcome to this edition of People in Transition. I'm your host, Bob Gerst. I've been hiring and mentoring executives, frontline employees, and job seekers for nearly 40 years through a host of transitions, some difficult, but most very good. This experience has given me a bird's eye view on a variety of trends, economies, industry disruptors, and transitions, big and small. It also brought me into contact with the thought leaders and decision makers you need to meet. Imagine knowing exactly what to do next and how to know it's time to make your big job change. We all know transitions can be scary, but it doesn't have to be. And it's even fun when you have actionable strategies and proven tactics to achieve the future you want. We'll share with you the tools and skills that can take your dreams to your next great job. So if change is on your horizon, you won't want to miss this discussion. Also, please subscribe to this podcast so you won't miss any future episodes. Get ready to energize your job search and elevate your career transition strategies with this powerhouse episode of People in Transition. Today, we welcome Mark Misiano, founder of RésuméReady, a career services leader who has transformed the professional journeys of over 1,000 clients worldwide. With certifications as a professional resume writer and digital career strategist, Mark combines his unmatched expertise with a personalized approach to help clients craft standout resumes, cover letters, and LinkedIn profiles that leave the hiring manager highly interested in that candidate. Mark's dynamic career spans higher education and entrepreneurship, where his passion for making professional career services accessible has garnered him many accolades. From college graduates to Fortune 500 executives, Mark has a unique ability to understand your value, unlock your full potential, and position you as the top choice for your next career move. In this episode, we'll explore how Mark's comprehensive job search plans can ease the burdens of career transitions while yielding life-changing results. We'll also discuss how his coaching and proven methods have helped clients secure interviews and job offers, often in record time. The episode will be structured in a way that allows you to follow along and apply Mark's strategies to your own career journey. If you're ready to invest in yourself and your future, this episode is for you. Download it now to learn how Mark can help you land your next opportunity with confidence and clarity. Good morning, Mark.
Good morning, Bob. How are you?
I am great. I'm so excited about having you on the show with us today. Mark, one of my signature questions that my listeners love to hear about is, if you think back when you were a child, what was it that you wanted to be when you grew up?
I love that question. I, hilariously, looking back, really wanted to be a storm chaser. I was obsessed with the Weather Channel and the movie Twister, and always thought that I would grow up to drive around the Midwest and chase tornadoes. But here I am instead, career coaching, resume writing, and I love it. Wouldn't change it for the world.
What were the transition moments that you went through in your career to take you from that vision of yourself as a child, as a storm chaser, to today as a coach? What were those transition moments?
I went to school for international business and French in my undergrad and really enjoyed school, but had no idea what I wanted to do when I left school. So after I graduated, I ended up working for my college in academic advising and worked there for a long time. I became the lead academic advisor for the School of Business and was growing and really did like higher education. I liked being able to help people achieve their goals and walk them through the process and really enjoyed that. I started working in communications after that for the same school and was working with marketing and public relations to edit everything that came out of those departments for grammar and style, structure, even branding and colors to make sure we were hitting our target audience in the right ways. And so it really honed my ability to edit and make things look presentable. I'm very much a perfectionist, and so it was a great fit for me. When the school restructured, I got laid off. And so I started to consider what might be next and had absolutely no idea what to do. So I felt that kind of aimlessness that a lot of job seekers feel. I got a recommendation from my sister, actually. She said, why don't you start a business writing resumes? Because I had helped people all through college and grad school as I got my MBA to write resumes and really communicate their value effectively because I just was a good writer, a good editor. And so I said, I don't really think that's a job. And then I looked into it and it turns out it was. So like you mentioned, I started getting credentials and have grown doing lots of continuing education, lots of credentialing. So I'm a certified professional resume writer, certified executive resume writer. You mentioned the LinkedIn certification I have, certified digital career strategist. And then recently this year, I completed the Certified Professional Career Coach program as well, all through the Professional Association of Resume Writers and Career Coaches, and do tons of continuing ed there. So I have built up my business. I started very part-time and then took my business full-time 2 weeks before anything about the pandemic was in the news. So I started working from home. I now do a lot of travel, get to work remote, and have the opportunity to help tons of people in all sorts of different industries to find their calling, pursue that calling in a way that gets them interviews, gets them job offers, and lands them the role of their dreams.
Mark, the whole recruiting process has evolved, and I think that evolution was sped up because of the pandemic. What have you seen as some of the practices that have emerged or come forward in the last 3 or 4 years in the hiring process? And then a follow-up question to that is, what are you seeing in your crystal ball looking forward as to hiring practice changes?
I love that question. The pandemic really did change a lot of things, some for good, some for bad. We have on the positive side this idea that gaps in resumes, shorter term employment, it's not as big of a deal as it used to be because hiring managers are much more accustomed to seeing it these days than they were in the past. And so the pandemic, where people were getting furloughed and laid off, it really changed the way that we look at resumes, where instead of going, there's a gap here, that's suspicious, hiring managers are saying, there's a gap here. Well, there's probably a reason for it. And they're moving on and not being as concerned about it. So folks who have gaps or folks who have shorter term positions aren't dealing with as much, I don't want to say discrimination, but they're not dealing with as many hurdles as they did before. And so that's a positive. What you're seeing, though, as well on sort of the negative side, is that folks are a little bit less loyal to their employers than in the past. We are in an age where more people are willing to leave for fewer reasons. So it almost doesn't matter the reason. People are pretty much willing to leave an employer at any time, which means that the job market is fascinating because not only are job seekers competing with others who may be unemployed or underemployed, you're also competing with the folks who are sitting at their desks now more than ever, fully employed and looking for new work anyway, because maybe they want something remote or hybrid or higher paying or in a different industry. There's just more applications out there than ever before for roles that are available. You may have seen 250, 300 resumes per job out there in the past. Now, so many times I'm seeing job postings with 800, 900, 1,000 applicants because everyone's hitting a quick apply button. And the ability to do that has really changed the way that we envision job searches. They can be less time consuming because you have to put forth less effort. And so now there's much more competition. The idea of a quick apply, quick option to submit your application sometimes won't cut it because no matter how good your resume is or how well qualified you are, you'll get lost in that stack of resumes much more easily. And so it's about kind of going above and beyond. I think one of the things that I see in the future is that the folks who put in more effort, the more tenacious people are the ones who are likelier to have jobs or job opportunities presented to them. Because if I quick apply, I'm not as likely to get to a person. But if I'm building relationships, if I'm making connections and expanding my network and leveraging existing connections, building new relationships, those are the kinds of things that are going to get me in front of people. And people still ultimately make the decision on hiring. And so people are where to put your time and effort. So quick applies, that one-click option are great options, but it tends to be that if you focus more on the people aspect, you're much more likely to land something and land something faster.
Mark, I read oftentimes that before you launch your recruiting strategy, you should understand your own values, your own interests, your own needs, because that will help you align them with potential companies' values and what they stand for. What does that all mean to you, and why is that important?
I think a lot of times folks walk into a job search and wander around a little bit. They meander and walk through it kind of arbitrarily. And the planning process makes everything faster, makes everything easier. And so the folks that I work with tend to be really strategic about their job searches. Instead of, I'm going to open up Indeed or LinkedIn or Monster or ZipRecruiter today and just see what's out there, there's a lot of planning. Getting things out of our heads and down on paper helps us to be more objective about what's next and intentional about the job search. And that intentionality allows us to be more tenacious. And so the things that I have folks do are to go through different exercises to get these concepts out of their brains. So we talked about target job titles. Let's list every single job title you think you might qualify for and jot it down so that as you're identifying opportunities, you're able to have a starting point for when you start your job search. You kind of know what to type in as you go into LinkedIn or Indeed or one of the job platforms that are out there. We do a lot of research about corporate culture. What are the types of companies you might want to be in? Or do you want to work for a startup and wear several different types of hats when you go into work? Do you want a really large Fortune 500 where you have a very specific place, you have a very specific silo, and you stay there, you operate there? What do you want your relationship with your boss to look like? Do you want hybrid or remote work? What about salary and compensation and total package, total rewards? There's so many things to consider. And so I have what I call a hell yes and hell no list. Things that are absolute musts for them in their next job, things they have to have. And then on the other side, there are deal breakers, things that will make them say no and walk away. And knowing what those are at the outset can be really important because even saving time walking through a job search, you don't have to spend 10 minutes reading through a job description and kind of pondering and wondering if it's the right fit and should you apply. If you notice it has 3 things on your hell no list, you know that you can move on and you don't have to spend the time reading, pursuing it, determining if it's the right fit. You've already determined. And so it can save a lot of time in the job search too. And so going through that process really helps people to understand what might be next for them, hone that job search, and then target that job search in a way that's more effective. Because as soon as we can identify what are the types of organizations, like you said, you can look at what are your values compared to theirs, how do those align, and then communicate that value in a really clear and concise way. As you walk into the resume tailoring and targeting process, you're looking at specific job descriptions to understand what types of skill sets you need to communicate, including soft skills. Again, going back to the question about what's next, I think soft skills are going to be wildly important because we have so much AI, we have so many computer skills, we have so many technical skills, but you can be the most technically proficient person. But if you can't communicate effectively, if you can't empathize with other people, if you can't partner with other departments and see from their perspectives, all of those things are going to make you not a good fit. And I would venture to say not at all qualified for the roles that you want. And so being able to balance and demonstrate both hard skills and soft skills is going to be really important moving forward.
Mark, I read and hear more and more about a hidden job market. Can you describe to us what that is all about? And is there a way that I can strategically tap into that hidden job market?
Absolutely. And that's all about relationships. The hidden job market basically exists where, number one, jobs are not posted at all, that companies identify candidates and pursue those candidates. Number two, jobs are posted, but only because HR requires it. And it's unlikely that anyone's really going to get in the door without some sort of a recommendation, referral, or knowing somebody. And so pursuing the hidden job market means that you're being strategic about how you're approaching people and intentional about connecting with folks at target companies to make sure that any opportunities that are out there, posted or not, you have insider access to. And so one of the biggest ways to tap into that job market is just to start having conversations with people. I'll often call this a curious conversation. And a curious conversation is not about you finding a job. It's about you building a connection and making a relationship, building rapport with people. And so you might have a curious conversation with a person who's in the job that you want to have. And so if you want to be a software developer at a big software company, you might identify using the search bar on LinkedIn, someone who's in that position, message them a little bit of authentic flattery. I love what you're doing at XYZ company and want to learn more about how you do what you do. So a quick intro, you don't have to tell them who you are. You can just say, hey, I'm interested in you. And then specifically ask a question. Humans hate ignoring questions. And so tactically, I always tell people, reach out and play to the psychology of how people look at messages. We are much more likely to answer a question because the human brain hates ignoring a question. If you reach out and say, I love what you're doing at XYZ company and I'd love to chat, period. You're less likely to hear back from that person than if you say, I love what you're doing at XYZ company. Do you have 10 or 15 minutes to talk about how you got to where you are today? Question mark. You're much more likely to receive an answer. Now, not 100% of the time, but you will increase the rate at which you receive responses by asking questions. And it's not, do you want to meet for 10 or 15 minutes because I want a job? It's only about building that relationship so that you can walk into that conversation asking insightful questions. 2 or 3 insightful questions can last 10 or 15 minutes in a conversation. You're really not even talking about yourself very much. You're asking about them, their pain points, what they love about their job, what inspires them, what continuing education things they've done, how the pandemic has changed their job, their company, or their industry. And you just get people talking about themselves. At the end of that 10 or 15 minutes, you start to tap into this hidden job market a little bit more specifically by going one of several different directions, depending on how your conversation went. You can ask for a recommendation. Hey, I noticed that there's a job opening in your department. Would you be willing to refer me? Some companies have referral programs. Employees might get paid if that person signs on and gets the job. You might ask if the person's willing to look at your resume and just keep you in mind if there are any openings in their department because it was so great to meet them that now you're even more excited about joining the team. You could ask for an introduction to the hiring manager in that department, or you could simply say, is there anyone else you think I should be talking to? It's all about expanding that network because you want to come to mind when people think, oh, there's a job opening. And then suddenly you're top of mind for them. And so now maybe the person you met with is the hiring manager or knows who the hiring manager is. When you do an application or when you just ask if there's anything available, you're much more likely for them to think, oh, that person was really nice. I like them a lot. They were really helpful. They were inquisitive. That's the kind of person I want on my team. And so your qualifications, sure, I'm sure you'll be qualified for the type of job that you're pursuing, but more so it's about fit. And you can demonstrate organizational fit even before you apply by having those types of conversations with people and building that network, expanding your relationships so that those opportunities start to come knocking to you a little bit more than you having to pursue them.
Mark, you've mentioned a couple of times that quick apply button. Is it okay for us to use that? And strategically, how does that fit into your recruiting strategy?
Absolutely. I think it's fine to use the quick apply button. Typically, what I say is that it's a great tool, but is also only one tool in a larger set of tools that you can use in a job search. That's kind of a high volume approach. Hitting the quick apply button as many times as you possibly can on as many jobs as you possibly can. And that's okay to do. What I will say is that your response rate is going to be much lower. Statistically, you might hear back from 3 to 5% of those jobs. It's not a huge response rate because everyone is hitting the quick apply button. You're not standing out. You're not distinguishing yourself from anyone else. And so don't expect that that is the only thing you can do. If you're clicking and then sitting on your hands and waiting, you're probably doing it wrong. I encourage folks to use that approach for jobs that seem okay, for jobs that are fine. I could totally do that job. Sure, I'll throw my hat in the ring and see what happens. But if you are looking at a job and it's the perfect job for you, I don't want you using that high volume approach where you just quick apply and hope something happens. I want people identifying those ideal jobs for themselves when they see that job description, maybe even putting it aside for a little bit and finish doing the quick applies and get through as many as you can in 30 or 45 minutes. Take a little break, come back, and focus on what I'll call a high impact approach to the jobs that are perfect. And so that's where you're going above and beyond. You're applying directly on the company website instead of the one-click option. Let's remove that intermediary. We don't need LinkedIn to be the intermediary or Indeed to be the intermediary. Just go directly to the source so that you know that your application is getting directly to human resources. Then you reach out. You start to build the connections. Who can you identify? Using LinkedIn search bar, using the company website. How can you customize, tailor, target your resume, your cover letter toward the specific role that you're applying for and really stand out by reaching out? I had a client who did this one time, wanted to be the director of financial aid at a community college. So he emailed the vice president of finance, who he thought would likely be his direct boss. She emailed back and said, "You have to apply on the company website." And he came back to me and said, "Well, this is frustrating because when I emailed her, I told her that I had already applied on the website." He ended up getting the job, the exact role that he wanted. And when he built a little bit of rapport with his boss, who did end up being the VP of finance, he said to her, "Remember when I applied, I told you I applied online, but when I got a response from you, it said to apply online, which I had already done." She looked at him and said, "I do remember that. That is because the only thing HR allows us to say to potential employees so that we don't run into any HR legal issues is apply on the website." She said, "I said that because I didn't want to ignore you, but that's all I was allowed to say. You were the only applicant who reached out to me. And so when I went to HR, I asked for your resume to be on the top of the stack." And so it can distinguish you, it can differentiate you when you do this high impact approach and really attempt to build relationships, even if it feels like it doesn't work. Sometimes in the back end, there are things happening that we know nothing about and can be really, really powerful. And so it's worth going above and beyond. Even if the response rate is still low, it can still be disheartening, but it's important to attempt to build relationships because people are the ones who are making those decisions. Even though we have to apply online, that's not the only thing we can do. And so use more than just the quick apply as a tool. Go above and beyond for the jobs that really matter the most to you.
Mark, you mentioned earlier about tailoring your resume for the job that you're pursuing. Do you really need to do that for each of the positions? And how much is that tailoring that you're suggesting? Do I do 10% of my resume, 60% of my resume? Give me some kind of ballpark that you're thinking of.
That's a great question. I like to distinguish first the idea of tailoring and targeting. I consider tailoring to be something that you do in general. So when I work with clients, I am typically the one tailoring the resume towards the types of jobs that they want. I'm usually not targeting one specific role. So I might work with an accountant. We're going to tailor the resume toward specific industry, right? So accounting jobs. The client then may take the time to target their resume toward one specific role, looking at the job description to influence how they're talking about specific things on their resume. So you might tailor a resume toward an industry or toward a type of job that you want to apply to, and then use that for your quick apply and send that out multiple times because it's good enough for the types of roles that you're applying for that are all kind of generally in the same category. When you're looking to target your resume, which is when you really hone in on what is in the job description and how do I communicate similar or the same concepts on my resume specifically, that does take a little bit of time. And I say for the high impact jobs where you need to go above and beyond and really make a connection, you want to be targeting your resume every time. And that doesn't have to take a really long time. There are certain sections of the resume where this can make a really big impact and can be pretty quick. I'm actually a huge advocate for AI in the job search and think that it can be a really helpful assistant. I am never asking AI to write resume content for me. But what I might do is give it a job description, give it the content of my resume, and say, what are the top 15 keywords and phrases I need to make sure are on my resume based on this job description to differentiate myself from other people and to grab the attention of the hiring manager? And let it give you a list of 15 skills. Then it's up to you to identify, do I have a keyword section where maybe I call it skills and qualifications, areas of expertise, or core competencies? Where can I use that language to make sure that I'm using the same types of language that I see on the job description and that this employer would expect to see? So that's where you can start to target more specifically. It might be as simple as replacing a couple of words with synonyms because you know that this company uses certain phrases based on the job description. It may be that you just quickly change the order of your bullet points. If social media management was something that you did and it's the last bullet point on each of your jobs on the resume, but it's the number one thing you'll do in a new position, you might simply pull that bullet point up to the top so it's the first thing that a hiring manager will see when they read your resume. It's just instilling confidence in your abilities because you're targeting and showing the skill set that you want to show most prominently. And so that's where you can really make more of an impact because someone's going to look at your resume and immediately go, oh, check, check, check. This person has all the skills I need. So usually the targeting happens, I would say, in the top 1/3 to 1/4 of the page of the first page of the resume. This is where you're going to pull all those keywords and make sure that you're communicating that value that aligns with the expectations based on the job description and the company culture. And then maybe a little bit down in your experience section. If you're spending 45 minutes on this, that's probably way too long. I typically say that, especially using AI and using it as an assistant instead of as a writer, you can gather ideas by having conversations with AI and doing that in probably 5 or 10 minutes to target your resume for one specific job.
Is there a rule of thumb that you use, Mark, in terms of how far back a more senior person should go to explain their experiences and showing dates of those earlier jobs and responsibilities?
I do have a general rule of thumb, but I feel like the answer to so many of these questions is it depends, because it can really depend on specific situations. So if I have somebody who's really senior level, but maybe switched industries 10 years ago, I might only show the most recent 10 years if they're trying to stay in their industry, because the industry before that doesn't matter as much. For really senior level and maybe executive leaders, oftentimes I'll go back 15, 20, 25 years, but not making the resume incredibly long. I'll still probably stick to 2 pages, but you can really adapt how you talk about yourself and what you include on the resume. So, for instance, I might have somebody who has been in their industry for 30 years. They've worked at maybe 3 or 4 companies, and they've had lots of positions as they've grown in those organizations. I might focus on the last 15 years where I have dates, I have employers, I have bullet points for each of those positions. Then everything before that, I might simply have an early career experience section where I list out the job titles and companies, including or not including the dates, depending on my client's level of comfort, just to show that they've been doing this for a long time, that they grew up in this industry, that they know it in and out because they've done it from top to bottom, from the ground up. And so it depends, I say, because sometimes there's zero value in showing really early experience from the 80s or 90s. Sometimes that experience is really valuable. There are some folks that I've worked with who might work in the startup space now, but want people to know that they have experience at IBM or General Electric because they're big, recognizable names. And so as I write a resume, I always try to think about this question: so what? If I look at it and I go, this has no value, so what? Why am I including this? It can get cut. But if I go, so what? Oh, well, IBM is a big name. That's important. Or it's important to show that this CIO has software development experience and understands technology from a very base level all the way up to the leadership strategic level. And so it depends on who you are, what you're trying to do, and where you're trying to go as the next step in your career.
Mark, what if I'm asked a really stupid question or maybe even an inappropriate question during the interview? What should I, as a candidate, do?
That is the hardest thing because there are very specific rules, laws about who and how and when and why and where you can ask specific questions during the interview process. The first thing I recommend is for people to become familiar with laws in their state about what employers are and are not allowed to ask you. Not that you have to be mean about it, but there are tactful ways to say, that's not specifically related to this role or how I'll perform. So I'll be glad to answer questions about my qualifications and what you can expect from me in this position, and really pivot the conversation to avoid mentioning anything that you're uncomfortable talking about while being graceful and tactful. I would say that most of the time, anyone who's asking inappropriate questions is likely not doing it maliciously. There are cases where that happens, but far more frequently, I think people ask questions like that either out of ignorance or without realizing how inappropriate or unnecessary they are. So if it's an illegal question, that's a very different issue. Asking about your age, if you're pregnant, things like that. But if you're just not comfortable talking about certain things, that's all right. And you are allowed to advocate for yourself and gracefully, tactfully either change subjects or ask to get back on track. And so I think being confident enough to advocate for yourself, going slow in it. Interviews are a high stress situation. There's a lot of adrenaline coursing through our bodies because we're under stress, even if we're confident that we're going to be a good fit for the job. It's important to take things slow, to breathe, to take pauses, so that you can allow your brain the few seconds it needs to process what you're being asked before you dive into an answer. Far too frequently, you'll end up answering a question you're not comfortable answering that was inappropriate or illegal because you didn't allow yourself the space to realize, oh, this probably isn't something we should be talking about. And so give yourself the space to identify when that's the case, educate yourself to know when it's either illegal or just plain inappropriate, and then make a pivot. This also may be a bit of a red flag for employers. If they're asking questions like that in the interview process, it might be worth asking them more questions about their corporate culture to identify if this might become a trend and you might be walking into a situation that's going to be unhealthy for you in general because they're showing their cards a little bit here by doing this already in the interview process. Does that mean that they're going to ask you to do inappropriate things, to break rules, to work extra hours without more compensation? It might be, not always, but might be an indication of some deeper cultural issues within the organization as well.
Mark, are there any books or other resources that you would recommend to our listeners who might be looking for their own next great job?
I think research is the best thing to do. It's a little bit daunting because it feels like there's not as many places to start. But when you're intentional and strategic about that job search, maybe listing out target companies or target job titles, knowing what it is you want, that's where the tools and resources come in handy. Certainly working with a professional, somebody who's credentialed, knows what they're doing is always the best resource. Find someone who's a certified resume writer or a career coach who has continuing education and certifications to their name, but then go industry specific with it. So if you're in project management, start looking at paid certifications that you might be able to pursue, like the project management professional through PMI. If you want to do something free, identify things like Google's project management certification that you can do. Always look for industry specific things because that's where the most value is going to be jam packed into whatever you pursue. And so my recommendation is that you look at what are others in your industry, or maybe people who have the jobs you want today. Look at their LinkedIn profiles. Are they recommending books? Are they recommending podcasts? Are they recommending certifications or have certifications that you should be looking at? And so that industry specific research is always the best resource that you have and can really help you plot out what the next steps look like for you to make sure that you become qualified or strengthen your candidacy for the jobs that you want.
Mark, we have gone through so much great information here this morning. If our listeners only remember three things, what are the three things that you want them to take away?
Number one, there are really only two types of people who get jobs: tenacious people and authentic people. If you can be both tenacious and authentic at the same time, you are much more likely to land a role. So go above and beyond. Do what you need to do to really distinguish yourself by building relationships, and that's your ticket in the door. Number two, target your resume for the jobs that matter most. When you find the ideal job, do not just click, 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 sit on your hands and wait. Do the things that matter, and the things that matter are really targeting that resume to demonstrate that you are the best fit, that you have all of the qualifications and check all of the boxes that they want you to check. Really highlight what it is that makes you unique. If it applies to everybody, it might not be worth mentioning, or find a way to do it in a more unique way. And then number three, the tip that I leave folks with at the end of an interview prep session is reminding them that the moment you walk in the door, you are 100% qualified for that role. No hiring manager is spending 45, 60 minutes with you if they don't think that you can do the job. When you walk into an interview, you might hear questions about your qualifications, but it's purely to make sure that you're the same person they saw when they looked at you on paper. After that, everything else is about fit. And so making sure that you're a good fit for the company, a good fit for that department or that team, working in that role, that's what's going to be the most important thing. And so you can sit up a little straighter and hold your head up a little bit higher, knowing that you are qualified. Otherwise, you wouldn't be in that room. That hiring manager has 8 hours of work to do. They might be picking up slack because there's an open position on their team. And now they have to take time out of that day to meet with a whole bunch of people who might be able to fill that spot. And they're not going to do that if they don't think that you can walk in and on day one contribute. And so you can relax a little bit, breathe a little bit, And removing some of that desperation really helps you walk through the interview process much more confidently. And when you're more confident, it is much more apparent that you're a good fit for the job. And so settle into that, remind yourself of that, and you're going to do an amazing job in the interview.
Mark, I see now why your clients go into their interviews holding their head high with that level of confidence because of the coaching that you provided them. And I know that our listeners, after this recording, will also have an edge on the competition. I want to thank you for your time today.
I appreciate the opportunity. Thank you, Bob.
Thank you for listening. We're working in unprecedented times. The purpose of these episodes is to give you the support and critical tools to adjust with the changing marketplace. I'll continue to introduce you to guests who have successfully survived their own obstacle course and can share useful information. If today's message was helpful to you, please share it on your social media. Your review and rating helps get this to more people. Also, if you have questions or podcast ideas for future conversations, reach out to me on LinkedIn. Change is constant. The more prepared you are for it, the better and easier the change will occur. Thank you again. This is your host, Bob Gerst. See you at our next episode.